Well, timing is really important in life. Location in real estate matters, and timing when you write a book matters. And Alan Shipnuck is a golf writer, 25 years at Sports Illustrated. He writes a book on Phil Mickelson. By the way, great book. Phil, the rip-roaring and unauthorized biography of golf's most colorful superstar. And then he decides to join the LIV Tour and becomes this controversial figure. You know, after reading your book, and I guess I never gave this thought, if you'd have told me there's two golfers that would have joined it, I would have guessed Greg Norman, who verbalized his frustration with the PGA Tour for years, and Phil, who's sort of an audacious eater and gambler and liver. And it's like, I'm not surprised by it. Were you shocked by either?
No, it's interesting because Phil and Greg have never been close, but they are definitely kindred spirits. I mean, they played the game the same way, which is aggressive to the point of reckless. It's kind of how they've lived their lives. And so it almost seems like it's in the stars that they would come together at this very complicated moment for professional golf. And it checks out. I mean, it's interesting that the players who have gone over to LIV, by and large, fit a personality type. I mean, Patrick Reed, Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of a polite term for that personality, but I mean, spiky, maybe. And so the league is sort of forming in Norman's image in a lot of ways. I mean, he's always stirred the pot. He's always been controversial. In some quarters, he's a pariah, really. And so it's fascinating how this has played out. And it's changed a little bit, you know, the addition of most recently of Charles Howell and Henrik Stenson. That's actually important for LIV because everyone likes those guys. They're like nice people. And
right.
I think they need to start recruiting some choir boys because, you know, Pat Perez, Jason Kokrak, like, again, these guys, they're a very particular personality type. And so it's interesting. If you're trying to win hearts and minds, you have to have players that people like and they want to cheer for. So it's fascinating to watch how this all plays out.
Well, I've talked about this with friends. Dana White, Vince McMahon. If you look at some of the great brand builders in MySpace, Dana White, we're going to go fight right in the middle of COVID. That's his personality. He's hyper aggressive. Vince McMahon has fought the critics forever. And I think you're onto something that the LIV Tour knew it was going to take people, if not contrarian, that are kind of alpha. But, you know, here's what's interesting to me, Alan, is there's pearl clutching over sports gambling. And then what generally happens, a wave of people accept it. And then we all kind of take a deep breath and go, So now Charles Barkley's name is out there. And I look at golfers, Alan, and I think to myself, well, they play golf since they're kids by themselves. A caddy's really just an employee. They're not teammates, right? They're not part of really a collective. They're always based on their score, independent contractors. And I think to myself, this was inevitable, that this is the sport of solo artists. Wasn't this inevitable at some point? If it wasn't Saudi Arabia, Alan, it's Amazon, it's Exxon, it's Apple. It's somebody looking at the PGA and thinking, you're very vulnerable. You're just an organizing group. This was going to happen, wasn't it?
Well, and it almost did in the early 90s, and that was Fox money. You know, that was Norman's buddy Rupert Murdoch who proposed. The two came up with this World Golf Tour, and it was a very viable competitor to the PGA Tour, but they didn't quite have the long money that the Saudis do, and Norman got outfoxed by a very cagey PGA Tour commissioner and Tim Fincham, who was a lawyer and a political operative. And this time, the scale's a little different. Norman has more money, and the current PGA Tour commissioner, Jay Monahan, doesn't have the same sensibilities as his predecessor, and so they've gotten purchase on this. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the tour, because it's been a monopoly on big time golf in the U.S., it had grown complacent and the product had become stale. I mean, the golf courses they choose, they had gone away from a lot of traditional venues in favor of these TPCs, which some are okay, but it doesn't exactly stir the soul when you see the initials TPC in front of a golf course name. And excuse me. And the style of play has become very one-dimensional. It's sort of analogous to baseball, where it's a home run or a strikeout, and that's it. I mean, the power games become so emphasized on the PGA Tour that the shot making, the finesse, the artistry, even some of the cerebral aspects of the game have been de-emphasized, and it's just a more boring product. So, and then you have the players, they've their relationship with the press has evolved, where they all want to monetize their content. They saw how Tiger signed this deal and Rory McIlroy signed this deal, and so they become more remote figures. They're not. It's harder if as reporters, if we can't tell their story and get people to care, that's a problem. That there's a reason that at the Olympics we watch all these vignettes, because you have to have a rooting interest, and the players have gotten more remote in golf. It hasn't served their interests, and so. There's a lot of things that have come together here that did, as you say, make the tour vulnerable. And the complicating factor, of course, is the Saudi money, because that causes a lot of emotion and a lot of cognitive dissonance for people. And so that's why we're having all these conversations. But from a pure competition standpoint, you're absolutely right. The tour needed competition, and now it's arrived in spades.
Yeah, I was contacted by Greg Norman's people the other day, and I'm interested in looking at it. And I think, for instance, broadcast television was vulnerable, and that really elicited a strong push by cable. Cable television's vulnerable. Here comes Netflix. And so the key is the Pac-12 is vulnerable. Here comes the Big Ten. The Big 12 is vulnerable. Here comes the SEC. The key is to not make yourself vulnerable. But some of this, let me defend the PGA, is just timing. I don't believe if Tiger Woods was in his 30s and crushing, regardless of money, Alan, LIV would not be as attractive. There was a certain panache and sex appeal that Tiger gave the tour. I mean, it was like Sopranos. I set my clock to Sunday. And I think as Tiger has become less relevant and Phil has aged, those were the two rock stars, in my opinion, after Greg Norman. I had 6 Greg Norman golf shirts. I mean, I'm serious, and I'm not a golf shirt wearer or a great golfer, but Greg was a rock star. And then here comes Tiger and Phil, rock stars. As they've diminished in relevance in a fragmented sports world, it's hard to grab onto the sport, Alan, for me. It's if I still root for Phil to be viable a year ago, for him to be viable on Sunday made my weekend. I like Brooks Koepka, but I don't feel that way.
Right. Yeah, for a decade or more, there's been hand-wringing about what is golf going to look like in the post-Tiger, post-Phil era.
Right.
This has been an issue that's been thought about and talked about for a long time. And to some degree, we can't get past them because, Tiger hijacked the narrative at the Open Championship just last week. Phil remains one of the biggest stories in golf, even though he's not really playing that well. So they're still, it's kind of the death rattle of their relevance, right. But it can't go on forever. And then, as you say, you lose a lot of juice, you lose a lot of casual fans. And so, what Norman identified is that, golf has changed. I think 4 million people tried the sport for the first time last year, and it wasn't on a golf course. It was at a 5-iron golf indoor facility. It was at a Top Golf, or it was, any like a little par 3 course. And people are coming to the game in non-traditional ways. And so what LIV Golf is trying to do is capitalize on these fans who, as you say, they don't have these long rooting allegiances, and they just want to experience the sport, and their panties are not in a twist about a shotgun start or 54 holes versus 72. It's not that big a deal to them. And so I think that LIV is, it's a classic disruptor along the lines of some of those models that you discussed. And again, the Saudi money makes it complicated from a moral / ethical / geopolitical standpoint. But just if you can separate that and compartmentalize that, it's pretty incredible what LIV Golf has built in a short period of time. I mean, no one would ever imagine they'd have this many Hall of Famers, major championship winners, and relevant golfers that they have in such a short period of time. And there's more coming. I mean, the Open Championship, I was just in St. Andrews, and the air was alive with talk about this deal and that deal and who's next and what's the number. And they're still going to land a few whales. And so they, very quickly LIV has reshaped the whole landscape of professional golf.
Well, and Alan, and something you touched on, look at the history of Amazon, which started as a bookstore, online bookstore. Netflix was essentially Blockbuster. I own a small company. We have completely pivoted off things in 12 months. Is the people who criticize LIV, the TV product, I'm like, folks, this business is less than a year old. Capital solves a lot of problems for small businesses, and I think in 2 to 3 years, I mean, what if LIV Golf just went to a network, Fox, for instance, and said, you gave up golf to NBC. You're not a streaming company. ESPN's a rival. They have a viable streaming option. We'll give you $500 million a year. Sponsor our tour. Put it on your network. I mean, I don't run Fox, but geez, Alan, everybody's looking for content. That seems viable to me, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot of jokes about the team element to LIV. Some of the names are kind of hokey, and some of the logos are funny, but it's not fully baked out because this has been an unusual year, as they're still adding players and they're still getting everything sorted. Next year's going to be very different. You're going to have these teams that are solidified for the whole year. And I think they're very cleverly unifying them around nations or regions. And so if you're a golf fan, you don't care about the Majestics or these titles they come up with. But if you're South African and there's a team of 4 South Africans, you're naturally just going to gravitate towards them. And
of course.
And they've got an all English team now. There's an all Spanish speaking team. They're looking to sign Hideki Matsuyama, who's the biggest star in Asia. So then if you have a team that represents Asia, like all of a sudden it becomes a little more viable. And I think the team aspect could take off. And that's also part of their business model, is to sell these franchises. And so, if you're Dermot Desmond, this big billionaire out of South Africa who loves golf, has always been interested in the game, why wouldn't you buy that? It's just fun. It gets you access to all these events. And then he has a rooting interest, and he brings all his capital and all his connections. And I do think that LIV is going to evolve in ways that we aren't even fully aware of yet. And if you've been following social media, both Bryson DeChambeau and Graham McDowell, they've been on social media with these NFTs that they've partnered with. And that's a potentially huge revenue stream, and something that the PGA Tour has been very slow to realize. And so there's money to be made, and LIV is shaking all those trees in a way that the PGA Tour is not. And that, plus the Saudi war chest, I mean, then, as you say, that gives them the ability to, if they don't need to make as much money from their TV deal or from some of these traditional channels, then they can be really innovative in the product. Because if you're on golf Twitter on Sunday afternoon for 10 plus years, people are always bitching about the TV coverage and the commercial load and the lack of innovation. Endlessly. It's obnoxious, but it's just there. And, watching these live streams has been a revelation, in that it's all golf. It is more golf shots per second than in the history of the sport. Now, of course, they don't have any sponsors or commercials or anything that will probably come over time, but that's definitely helped them in the popular imagination. Like, wow, okay, this is just pure golf. And so if they can retain that spirit, even as they bake out their whole ecosystem, and they are going to, of course, bring in at some point on corporate sponsors or whatever. But I think if they can, that's where they could be really disruptive. Is the golf TV product has been terrible for a very long time. And if they're going to rethink it and be really imaginative and really think about the viewer first, as opposed to the sponsors and the commercials and all that, then they can make big inroads in the sport.
Well, you just described XM Sirius. People complained about the onslaught of commercial reads during radio. XM Sirius said, no ads, like the LIV Tour. You get more talking. Now, over the course of 20 years, they've supplemented their subscription model with ads. But your point is, vulnerable businesses create XM Sirius. Howard Stern says, I can swear and don't have to do all these commercials. And so I think your point is a good one. First of all, your book, years ago, Oliver Stone made Wall Street. He did not mean to make Gordon Gekko a sympathetic figure, but he did.
Right.
That all these young traders wanted to be Gordon Gekko, not Bud Fox, right? And as I read the Phil book, I'm thinking, do I like him more? He's so flawed, a bit of a mess, so absurdly confident, at times obnoxious, at times deeply caring and thoughtful of others. That as I watched that, I thought, not in any way that you were trying to be like Oliver Stone and create an unsympathetic character. But as you were writing it, did you think to yourself at any point, oh boy, this could be punitive, this is damaging? Or did you think, I think when you get the whole enchilada, you like it more? Because at the end of your book, I had mixed vibes. At times I thought he's kind of a mess. And then I'm like, it's just part of Phil. It's who he is.
Yeah. Well, that was my intention. Is I tried very hard not to legislate people's emotions and feelings towards Phil. I didn't come in with an agenda and try and push this idea that feels good or feels bad. Because in some ways he's both. Like he's very complex and
right.
He's very multifaceted. So I just wanted to put it all out there and let each reader take from it what they will. And it's been fascinating to hear the reactions, because I've had people say I was never a Phil fan, and I've read it and I love the guy now despite his flaws. And he's lost some fans because there was things in the book that they found objectionable. And there's people who are very ambivalent. You know, they're torn. They're like, well, I love him and I hate him. And so I think that maybe I did my job, because he's not a cardboard cutout. He's not
No.
two-dimensional. And so yeah, I to your question, I was careful. Like I was always trying to bring it back when there's great stuff about his philanthropy and it makes you want to hug the guy. Then it's like, all right, well, let's sprinkle in a little spice here. And then when there's things that, you know, that are controversial and people might not like, you know, might not appreciate him. Okay, let's talk about his mentorship and his philanthropy. And so I was always trying to kind of toggle between the two extremes. So that was sort of an editorial decision, but ultimately it's just how Phil's lived his life. I mean, he's done a lot of great things and he's touched a lot of people and he's been a part of a lot of controversy and a lot of mess. And it's all in there.
It's one of my favorite golf books because you're not judgmental. You're an observer and a reporter. And I think toggle's a perfect word. There is a, the roller coaster effect where it's like, oh, this is a lot. And then you get that brief, oh, what a thoughtful ride this is. And his diet is not surprising. I take people I have somebody in my life who has a little bit of this personality, which is everything is big. The opinions are big. The gambling's big. Let me ask you this. Was the decision to join LIV an economic necessity at any point, do you believe? I mean, he's made well into hundreds of millions. But then I read about his gambling losses. And remember, he can make $100 million, but in California, you get 50. If you lose 50 million, you lost 100 million. Do you believe, Alan, there's some economic necessity here?
Yeah, I think there was some economic motivation. I mean, it was interesting because after the book came out, Phil started using the word addiction in regards to his gambling. He'd never said that. I think that was a powerful statement. And again, with Phil, you never know. Like, is part of that, is he worried about this Billy Walters book that's coming and Billy really knows about Phil's gambling? And by couching yourself in the terms of addiction, does that make you more sympathetic? So come what may, he can say, well, I had a problem, I've addressed it, I've moved on. Or was it a very sincere, opening of the soul and trying to reach out to people who may have had their own issues and let them know that he's with them and he's been through it as well. I mean, you never know with Phil. He's such a personality test at how you take that. But the fact is, for him to say that was powerful, and it tells you that it was a huge force in his life and it was a destructive force. And he claims that Phil can always make money. So whatever his problems were, and even if he was starting at scratch as of a year ago, the PGA Championship victory and the bonuses and now the LIV money, he should be on easy street. But, he said that he was candid that it's something he still has to work on. He's going to work on for the rest of his life. So that temptation is always there. We all have addicts in our life, and we know the struggle that they deal with. And so I think Phil's okay, but I think there was a time when it was very tenuous, and that's probably what forced him to seek help.
Reading your book and the opinions, obviously there's people that don't want to be quoted. Some people aren't confrontational, and if they don't love Phil, they don't want it out there. There's plenty of people, in my sphere that probably don't like me, but wouldn't want to be quoted, right, for the pushback. If not from me, from fans, right? Like, I get it, right? People, anonymous is very powerful. But when I read your book, I didn't think Phil was liked or disliked. I thought players are kind of fascinated with him. They're not jealous of him, but kind of. There's a part of him that I think every golfer's like, I kind of like to hang out with Phil for 4 or 5 days. Like, I don't know if envy's the right word, Alan, but there's a wonderment. I don't know if he's liked. He's a little too cocky to be beloved by all, but he is genuine. I think his people are a little, even today, I think his friends are kind of fascinated by him. Am I off here?
No, I think that's very astute. And, I tried very hard in the book not to have anonymous sources. I mean, almost everyone put their name on it, which was important to me.
Yes.
And, it was interesting because I've been writing about Tiger as long as I've been writing about Phil. And I've done some big deep dives on Tiger for Sports Illustrated, for cover stories,
yes,
and all that. And you call people up and they'll talk to you, but they don't want their name attached because of the blowback, because Tiger can be very vindictive and the people around him are very uptight. And so many people, when I called them about Phil, they were delighted to talk about him. And Jaime Diaz, who's been in the sport forever as a reporter, and he was a Tiger chronicler from an early age. So people have always gotten to Jaime. He had to be very careful what he said and didn't say. And he said to me at one point, he said, "Man, it's fun talking about Phil." He's like, "Let's keep going." He was having a great time. It was just like, you're unencumbered. And everyone does have stories. And it's funny though, because I asked many players, who are Phil's close friends on tour? And people really struggled to answer that. And a lot of them couldn't come up with any names. He bounces from group to group, and he'll run this little wolf pack in these Tuesday money games. And I think he wears people out, and he moves on to a different group. And it's part of, charitably, you could call it mentorship. He's taking on all these young players under his wing, and he's showing them the ways of the world, and he's building relationships, but he doesn't have those deeply rooted friendships. If you talk about Tiger Woods, you'd say Nota Begay, you'd say Marco Mira, you would say Charles Howell. You can come up with half dozen names pretty quickly, but with Phil, people came up empty, and I thought that was interesting. He's close to some of his college teammates, but in talking to people more contemporary in Phil's life, he's like, they only know one side of him, and it's a very specific side. And so I think in some ways, Phil's kind of a cipher or a chameleon, and I think that serves him well in certain scenarios. But I think there's also maybe a loneliness and an isolation. And I think some of the decisions he's made, it's pretty clear he's not had good advice around him, and he's kind of winging it.
Right.
I mean, you even saw it, that statement he put out after my book excerpt dropped. It was a total word salad. It was all over the place. And
right.
He made himself both the hero and the victim of the same press release. And it was like, obviously it read like a Donald Trump midnight tweet storm. It was just a total mess.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, someone needed to reel him back in, but I don't think he has those people in his life except for Amy. And she's taken on, I haven't seen her in a tournament since I think the Fall Masters going on 2 years ago. She's taken on a much lower profile. Impossible to say exactly what's going on there, but I wonder how many people Phil has close to him day to day, and who he can really go to. And I think that's part of his personality type. Even though he's always chewing the scenery, and he's always in the middle of some conversation, proving to people how smart he is, I do sense like a loneliness there. And so, for him, going to LIV Golf is a fresh start. He gets to be the captain of a team. He gets to draft guys. He gets to create his own little world around him. Right, and I think that's part of the appeal, is like, okay, this is a much more intimate tour. I've kind of put myself on the line to create this. These guys who are coming over here and getting this big money, they're a little beholden to me. And I think it was a chance for him to reshape his whole world in a way that was attractive and maybe necessary.
The book is called Phil. It's just fantastic, and it's an easy read. It's storytelling. It's funny. I read the first half on a plane, and if you've ever sat next to somebody on a plane who's laughing out loud, it makes you want to go buy the book. So I sold your book to at least one guy in A, B. I was in A, 1A. I want to circle back to Greg Norman. So I tend to, I tend to defend skiers and tennis players and golfers. It's hard. They're solo acts. Almost a single-minded selfishness is really the opposite of team sports. It can be a great beneficiary to you. I mean, you can look at the great Olympic skiers and the great tennis players, McEnroe on. They're intense. They're irascible. And so, when I looked at Greg Norman, he was fascinating. He was from Australia. The Shark, he had branding before branding. I mean, honestly, he's one of the first branded athletes I ever remember.
Yeah.
I can remember the color of his shirts, and the collars were different. And you guys had your situation where he's looking sternly behind you. And not knowing Greg and knowing you what I know, I laughed at it. I thought, oh, brother, this is going to be another book. But like Dana White creating UFC, like Vince McMahon, this is going to be a polarizing tour, and it's going to be hard, and you're going to get ripped, and you're going to need security. And not that I defended Greg in that moment, but I thought, I've seen this before. I've seen this build before, and it takes a feistiness, and Norman is perfect for it, in my opinion. I look at it and I think he's the guy I would have selected. Jack is too golf traditional. Greg always felt from Australia coming here. He feels like the guy that would have done this. And so, not that I'm sympathetic, Alan, but I get it. I get Norman in this tour. Does that make sense?
Totally. And yeah, I think what you said is very perceptive. I mean, he's an iconoclast, and that's always been his role in the game. And Norman, he's taken a lot of shrapnel through the years, but he's always, like Phil has done more recently. Greg back in the 90s was fighting for a lot of these same battles. The players should have a bigger slice of the pie, that they should have control of their media rights, that they should have control of their branding, that the tour was there to serve them, not the other way around. I mean, he's had a very particular point of view for a long time. And as PGA Tour's gotten bigger, more money's flowed into professional golf post-Tiger, I think a lot of players have come around to that same point of view. It took him 20 years or longer, but I mean, Norman was very much ahead of his time, as you said. And so he's kind of the right man at the right time. He's a polarizing figure. He loves the media. He loves the limelight. He loves the juice, to use a word that's been thrown around with Phil. And it takes it. I mean, I'm amazed he has the stomach for this, because he's taken a lot of bullets, and the guy's 68 years old. You would presume he's got all the money he needs, but for him, no one deals with the Saudis if they're not getting paid. So certainly he's getting a nice check out of this, but it's more about vindication. This is a 30-year grudge that goes back to his battles with the tour when he was outfoxed and humiliated. And so I think in the end, Norman probably would have done this for free, because it's a chance to be right. It's a chance to stick it to the tour. It's a chance to reshape the whole sport in his own image in certain ways. And for a guy like Greg, who thinks about his legacy, and for who cares, and who's always wanted to be this agent of change, it's just an absolutely delicious opportunity. And he's made a few minor missteps along the way, and he's put his foot in his mouth a couple times. But overall, you have to say it's impressive what he's built in a very short period of time. And it takes a certain cult of personality. The people who work for LIV Golf, I was at the event in London, as you referenced. I was also the one in Portland. There's only a couple of reporters who can say they went to both. And there is a cult of personality around Norman. The people who were running operations and running the details of LIV Golf, they're true believers. and he's the reason why. And so, and he's out there, he's having fun with the players, and it's interesting because the PGA Tour commissioner is always a bureaucrat, and the players always look at them as an opponent, and as almost like the school principal, who's waiting to scold you. But Norman's an equal, and he's a peer, and he's, in a lot of ways, I mean, none of these guys are going to be number one in the world for 330 weeks like Greg Norman was, right? Like, he's done things they could only dream about as a player. So
right.
they really look at him differently, as he's a protector, and he's a patriarch, and it's just a different energy between the players and Norman versus what the players had with the PGA Tour commissioner. And he's maximized and exploited that. And he's done a great job bringing these guys into the fold, feeling like they're part of something bigger, that they're playing for something that matters to them, which is obviously money, but also being able to do things their way, and to have a voice and to have control of their destiny, which most of them felt like they didn't have on the PGA Tour.
Let's wrap it up. Your relationship with Phil this very moment, now that the book has been published, how is it?
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, I'd say it's distant. I've been trying to get an audience with him at these events, and he has people around him who have way overreacted. Like in the final analysis, now that I've had a chance to like dig into what happened, I was at that press conference at the first London event, and I got bounced out by security goons. And it wasn't the LIV people; it was Phil's people who sent them my way. And I think this is all trying to piece it together, and everyone has a different story. But from my interpretation is, it was someone from his management company just overreacted. And so, whether Phil was in on it, whether he knew, I cannot say. But so I didn't get a chance to really interact with him at that tournament. I did ask him a question at the U.S. Open in a press conference, and it was a simple question. It wasn't a gotcha thing, and he answered it straightforward. And that took a little air out of things. But he played poorly in Portland at that event, and I just didn't really. I was always closing in on a moment, and then it evaporated. Because there's not really, we don't have access to the locker rooms, and with the shotgun finishes, everyone comes in all at once. It's not a steady, orderly stream of golfers on the 18th hole. Like,
that's right.
The entire field converges in the parking lot, and so it just hasn't happened. So I would still like to have a chat with him, just human to human, and he's got my phone there. I'm available. It's just a question of what he wants to say and when he wants to say it. But I would like to have that conversation. I hope we will, and we'll see how it goes.
One more. Brandel Chambly had a quote on the air, and he said, I forget, it was during an event, and he said, Phil's 31 over, Dustin Johnson's playing terrible golf. Is that you got the bag? Why do you have to play great golf? And I thought, I don't know if that's true, because Patrick Mahomes got the bag and he still cares. But as the commentator said, this is not a team sport. Do you think that players are a bit disincentivized to work on their games? I thought it was interesting because all golfers are more fascinating when they play great golf, right? But there is no, I thought it was an interest. My takeaway was, I'm not sure he's right, but it's certainly psychologically possible. Do you sense that?
Yeah, but you could extend that to when a guy won the FedEx Cup and won $15 million, life-changing money. Did they just mail it in the next season? No, I mean, I think it's human nature to be complacent, but the great golfers are obsessive, right? Like, that's what drives them.
Right, they are.
And when Phil Mickelson stands over a golf ball, whether it's in his backyard or it's at the Masters or it's some live event, he wants to hit a great shot. That's how he's been conditioned. Now, when these guys sign for this big money, are they going to put in the time at the gym and in the tournament prep? Do they have that same hunger? We'll find out. It's too small a sample size so far to say that, based on 2 tournaments on the LIV Tour or a couple majors, that these guys are mailing it in. We just don't know that. And the idea that because they're not on the PGA Tour now, they're not going to grind. I mean, the financial incentives on the LIV Tour are monumental, and professional golfers by definition play for money. And so these guys are going to go hard. I mean, I'm not sure there's much difference between a regular tour event and a live event as far as, there's a few special ones, but if you're at Memorial with Jack Nicklaus, if you're at the LA Open because of the grandeur of Riviera, like there's 5 or 6 PGA Tour events that are really special week in, week out. The other 3 or 4 dozen, the difference between, Sea Island and versus the Quad Cities, like they all kind of blend together. And so
they do.
They do. And so I think that professional golfers, they have to motivate themselves. They're playing 3 weeks in a row and they're at a B-list event. What makes them want to play well? I mean, partly it's they're chasing money, and there's a lot more money to chase on the LIV Tour. And so I don't really agree that these guys are going to stop trying, but I think this time next year, after we've completed, basically a year and a half of LIV competition, and we've seen how these guys perform in the majors along the way, I think we can maybe start drawing some conclusions, but it's too early right now.
The book is called Phil, the rip-roaring and unauthorized biography of golf's most colorful superstar. He also writes for the Fire Pit Collective. It's really a good read. It's fun. It's fast. You grab it a couple times and you put it down and you're like, it's like one of those binge watching Netflix shows. It's going to take you a couple days, 6 episodes. Folks, you're going to absolutely love it. And as I said earlier, I don't know. Flawed Phil, fun Phil is fulfilling Phil. I liked him. Alan, absolute pleasure for me. You're such a great storyteller and a reporter. You're really sharp. And I just, you got things going on in your life. Now you're chasing Greg Norman or he's chasing you, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the kind words. It means a lot to me. Appreciate it, Colin.
All right.